I know, very generic choice of topic today. Or is it? You see, ladies and gentlemen, the Greeks had one of the biggest advantages of any civilization the world over, and that was getting their start smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, which, if you've been keeping up with the Messiahs and Mythology video map, you'd see a pretty big disparity compared to somewhere like, say, South America? Don't worry, we'll get to them. There's like a billion ethnic groups native to that region. There's bound to be one that's going to catch my interest. Speaking of natives, though, when we traditionally think of the Greeks, you're probably thinking of the classical-era Hellenistic Greeks, which gave rise to various fields of study such as science, philosophy, and history, and is generally agreed upon to be the birthplace of Western civilization. That being said, the Greeks never were, and arguably still aren't, a united, homogeneous culture rather than a smorgasbord of smaller, harder-to-pronounce swabs of people who had an influence upon one another, and for the most part, all contributed something to the national identity of Greece as a whole. Arguably, at least for me, biased as fuck as I am, the most prolific and recognizable aspect of Greek culture is the emphasis on their mythology, as it arguably stands on equal footing with the likes of the big five religions nowadays in terms of recognizability, and just for the fact that it isn't another Abrahamic or Hindi offshoot. That being said, while Islam and Christianity have the Garden of Eden, and the Hindus and Buddhists have, well, I mean, what the fuck do they not have for a creation story? Greece's mythological beginnings are typically traced back to the Theogony by Hesiod. However, this is a later variation of the myth, brought into writing sometime around the 7th century BC with the Proto-European, I prefer the other name YouTube doesn't like, influences placed upon it. There is actually an older creation story attributed to the mysterious Pelasgian people, who were thought to be kicking around Greece some 28 centuries before this wave of migrated Greeks came to settle the land. Well, supposedly. We have very little evidence aside from the word of classical Greek poets such as Homer and the aforementioned Hesiod, which attest to these people's existence, probably because they identified under a different name than the one ascribed to them by later generations of Greece. The Pelasgians were/are a bit difficult to study, as the likes of Homer writing about them is akin to me writing about, well, Homer. And this is without the post-Victorian methods of researching and the immaculately preserved written records which I have access to today at my very fingertips. And books. Shitloads of books. I may have a problem. I'm trying to say in a polite way that pretty much everything we get from the Greeks is conjecture at best, and nothing more than mere mythology at its core. That being said, we have some pieces of their religion to glean from in the form of female statuettes discovered in the region which date back to right around this point in history, suggesting that like many Neolithic cultures, they probably practiced some form of fertility worship, with the more patriarchal, animistic elements typically attributed to the ancient Greek mythology being imported by later migrants from the north. We can also assume, by the burying of ritual artifacts with the corpses of their deceased, that the Pelasgians probably believed in some sort of afterlife, which may, very big emphasis on the may, suggest that ancestor worship was also a part of their religion. Like the Celtic creation story, however, the Pelasgian creation narrative is a much more modern reconstruction of their belief systems, which I did not write myself, before anyone accuses me of that and makes a fool out of themselves. Again. This version of the story is provided to us by the late great scholarly mind of Robert Graves, who coincidentally enough was also a student of Irish Celtic mythology. Graves took apart the various different accounts of the Pelasgians and reconstructed what their creation story might have looked like based on the aforementioned archaeological evidence, written records of the later Greek poets, and the Bible, and Zoroastrianism, and modern astronomy. Okay, look, it's not perfect by any stretch of the word, but as a writer of mythology all my own, click that link in the corner, it does a serviceable yet heavily biased job, assuming that the Pelasgians came from somewhere in the Middle East to settle into modern-day Greece. Where exactly? There's a great deal of speculation as to that quandary, which isn't exactly helped, nor hindered, I suppose, by the Greek etymology of the word Pelasgian. Some people think that they get their title from Pelasgos, which means a stork, suggesting that rather than being an indigenous population to the region, they migrated, much like the stork is known to do, speculatively from Egypt. Others postulate that Pelasgian comes from Pelasge, which means neighboring land, implying that these were, at least in the eyes of the Greeks, the closest alien peoples to the colonizing Greeks, which, due to how vague that title is, could be a number of defined or in many cases undefined peoples in or around the Mediterranean region. However, there is a third speculated meaning to the Pelasgians, and that is Pelagskoi, or flatland inhabitants. I personally put a bit more stock in this etymology, if for nothing else how infinitely interested and decomplicated it would make the whole thing. TLDR, the Hellenistic Greek word for sea and the Doric word for flat are very similar, and suggest that they share a root word, which means that Pelagskoi can be interpreted as where the sea is flat, specifically denoting their homeland as the Thessalian plain. I think I said that right, holy shit. Or, much more interestingly, it can also be read as the Sea People, which makes them a probable contender for the mysterious Sea Peoples who invaded ancient Egypt. Though, that one is way up in the air. Or, you could be a keyboard warrior using outdated evidence to shout, "We was Kangs and shit," and state that every civilization on Earth was started by the sub-Saharan Africans with what can be charitably described as flimsy evidence at best and total bullshit from a practical angle. Yeah, okay, so the Pelasgians were probably the native peoples of Greece. So, why did I bother going a little ham-fisted with a culture which the knowledge of can be accurately summarized with a shoulder shrug? Well, besides me and the majority of my audience being hapless losers who actually get excited over this sort of stuff, the creation story, the actual focus of today's video, is only about 4 paragraphs long. Understandably, I had to stretch some things out. So in the beginning, everything is pretty much the same. Cosmic void, which sometimes takes the form of an egg? Check. Primordial waters, which show up out of nowhere? Also check. Initial creator god or goddess inexplicably forming him/herself out of the void for no discernible reason? What do you take these people for? So in the beginning, Eurynome, whose name means wide wandering, formulates herself out from the chaos and starts ice skating on the primordial waters minus the ice, with the north wind chasing after her as she went, until all of a sudden she turned around and caught the wind in her hands, crafting it into a serpent she lovingly names Ophion, before shoving it headfirst into her vagina. Because of course, she needs to make more shit. And apparently the Pelasgians have a sense of humor on par with the 7th grader, who also noticed that a snake looks like a phallus. Getting some Yu-Gi-Oh vibes out of this, I don't know why. Afterwards, Eurynome transforms into a dove, squeezes an egg out of her asshole, and Ophion, in his infinite fatherly wisdom, decides that coiling around an egg several times and squeezing it like it's prey is a good way to expedite the process of childbirth. This inexplicably works, and out of the egg came the everything. You know what? It's faster just to say everything minus the first human. So everything minus the first human came out of this egg. So after this, Eurynome and Ophion take up residence on a totally innocuous mountaintop, which will absolutely never be important for anything else down the line. Until Ophion got horny again and wanted mommy to step on him, and so he provoked her by proclaiming himself as a divine progenitor of the universe. And so she steps on him a little too hard, knocking out all of his teeth, before kicking him off of Mount Olympus into the dark recesses beneath the earth for committing the original sin of lying about who created the universe, wherein Ophion becomes a spiritual foil to Eurynome, and this all sounds incredibly familiar, holy shit. If only there was a big-dicked 140 IQ paragon of masculinity educational mythology YouTuber who made videos on this very subject. Oh well, I guess the world will never know. After this, Uranome becomes bored and decides to conjure up some planetary bodies and assign them a pair of titans and titanesses to preside over, all of which have incredibly familiar names. Thea and Hyperion get the sun, obviously, Phoebe and Atlas the moon, Dione and Crius Mars, Metis and Cous Mercury, Themis and Eurymedon Jupiter, Tethys and Oceanus get Venus, and hilariously Kronos and Rhea get Saturn. Really want to flex your forced pattern recognition there, don't you, Graves? The last thing Uranome creates is the first man from the Earth named Pelasgos. I'll let you sort out who he is the progenitor for, and fuck. Looks like this isn't his only origin story, as the Hellenistic Greeks really wanted to lay claim to Pelasgos as well, and seeing as his narrative echoes a theme of fertility worship clashing with patriarchal structures of later religions, which can be an interesting lesson in of itself, guess who is getting his own mythological character study? Congratulations, Pelasgos, until we actually decide to do the meme and give the foot-rubbing deity from Shintoism his own video, you will probably be the most unremarkable figure we ever cover on this channel. And a mere footnote in your own fucking video. Thank you to everyone for watching today's video. This script was written in literally less than 5 hours, so if I fucked up anything, please feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. If you have some spare change lying around, then maybe consider supporting me on either Patreon or the Streamlabs account linked down below, like these wonderful people right over here. YouTube is being a dick about insisting I sanitize my content for monetization, so that's really not a profitable route to take. However, if you're a broke asshole like me, you can support the channel by leaving a like, sharing the video, and subscribing for more mythological content in the future. Until next time though, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Messiahs of Mythology, and have a God's blessed day.